Hi, dear, welcome back. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep cannot reach. It appears before the alarm rings, before your first thought forms, before the day even begins. It settles behind your eyes like a weight you did not choose, and you carry it long before your feet touch the ground. This story is about that kind of heaviness, the kind that does not come from work or lack of rest, but from carrying too much inside without realizing it. If you have ever woken up exhausted even when nothing was wrong, this story may help you understand what your mind has been trying to say. Evan lived a simple life with quiet routines and predictable days. He woke at the same time each morning, prepared the same breakfast, and walked the same route to work. From the outside, everything looked peaceful, but inside, he woke with a tired mind long before his body even rose. Each morning he sat at the edge of his bed, trying to understand why he felt worn out before the day began. His body wasn't weak, and his schedule wasn't difficult. Yet his thoughts moved slowly, as if wading through unseen water. At work, simple tasks felt heavier than they should. He reread instructions, hesitated before small decisions, and often felt out of sync with the world around him. His evenings were quiet but not restful. He went home, made tea, and tried to unwind, yet his mind remained crowded with unfinished thoughts. Messages he hadn't answered, tasks he postponed, expectations he feared he wasn't meeting. He wasn't overwhelmed by any single thing. He was weighed down by everything at once. He often wondered why life felt harder on the inside than it looked on the outside. But he never found an answer, until the day someone asked him a question he had never thought to ask himself. One evening, Evan stepped outside to escape the echo of his own thoughts. On the bench near the building entrance sat Mr. Hale, his older neighbor, calm as always, as if the world moved at a gentler pace around him. Evan sat beside him without thinking much about it. The quiet evening air made the exhaustion inside him feel more visible. After a long pause, the old man observed that Evan looked tired, not in the ordinary sense, but in a way that suggested something deeper. Evan admitted he felt worn out without understanding why. He explained that he slept enough, worked reasonable hours, and carried no clear problems. Yet his mind felt heavy every day. The old man considered his words and then asked something Evan didn't expect. He wondered what Evan's mind was carrying that his body could not. He spoke about how the body rests when it sleeps, but the mind only rests when it feels safe. He suggested that exhaustion often comes not from doing too much, but from holding too much silently. Evan didn't fully understand, but he felt the truth in those words. Something inside him shifted, opening a small doorway to understanding what he had long ignored. Over the next days, Evan noticed thoughts he had always pushed aside. He paid attention to how often his mind stayed busy even when nothing demanded it. He realized he hesitated before replying to messages, not because he was busy, but because he feared disappointing others. He recognized the quiet pressure he placed on himself to appear calm, capable, and controlled at all times. He began noticing how his tiredness intensified whenever he felt he wasn't enough. Enough for his job, enough for friends, enough for the version of himself he believed he should be. He carried small worries about the future and old memories of mistakes that resurfaced whenever his mind grew still. One night, he opened his notebook and wrote a question: "What am I carrying?" Slowly, he listed the quiet fears, expectations, and emotions he had avoided acknowledging. As the list grew, he realized that his exhaustion wasn't caused by one large problem, but by many small weights he never allowed himself to release. For the first time, he understood that his tired mind was not a flaw. It was a message he had ignored for too long. The conversation with Mr. Hale lingered in Evan's mind long after he stepped back into his apartment. It stayed with him while he washed the dishes he had left in the sink. It followed him into the shower, where the sound of running water made his thoughts louder instead of softer. It was there when he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling with the lights switched off. He wasn't someone who believed a single conversation could change him, yet this one unsettled him in a way that felt important. He began noticing things he had ignored for months, small thoughts that slipped through his mind before he could catch them. The feeling of holding his breath longer than necessary during the day, the tension he carried in his shoulders even when he was resting, the way he hesitated before opening messages, as if the simple act of reading them might demand an energy he didn't have. The way his heart seemed to sink slightly each time he received a request, even harmless ones. The heaviness wasn't new. What was new was the awareness of it. The next morning, he woke with the same tired weight behind his eyes, but this time, instead of pushing it aside, he tried to observe it. It felt like waking up with a bag in his hands that he didn't remember picking up. He couldn't see what was inside, but he could feel its heaviness. He sat on the edge of the bed and watched the soft morning light spill through the curtains. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder if the tiredness wasn't just a feeling, but a signal. As the days passed, he started paying attention to the moments when the exhaustion intensified. At work, he noticed how every unfinished task left a quiet pressure on his chest, as if each one whispered a reminder of something incomplete. Even simple decisions, what to eat for lunch, how to phrase an email, whether to accept a small invitation, felt heavier than they should. He realized that each decision opened a door in his mind, and each door added another piece to the weight he carried. He remembered how many times he avoided saying no, even when he wanted to. He thought of the expectations he placed on himself, expectations no one else asked him to meet. He recognized how deeply he feared disappointing others, even in small ways. These fears didn't shout. They piled up in quiet layers, unnoticed but present. One evening, after a long day that had no particular difficulty, yet felt exhausting all the same, Evan sat at his kitchen table with a notebook. He stared at the blank page, unsure what he expected to find. He wrote a single question near the top. What am I carrying? The question looked simple, almost too simple for the heavy feeling in his chest, but it was a place to begin. Slowly, he wrote down the things that came to mind. Not dramatic moments or big fears, just the tiny thoughts he had pushed aside each day because they seemed too small to matter. He wrote about the message from a friend he hadn't answered because he didn't know how to respond. He wrote about the upcoming work review he dreaded even though he knew he was doing fine. He wrote about the pressure to appear calm, capable, and put together when inside he felt anything but stable. He wrote about the memories that resurfaced when he was tired, small mistakes from years ago that still carried a quiet sting. As he wrote, the list grew longer than he expected. When he finally put his pen down, he realized he had been holding far more than he ever admitted, not because he was hiding anything from others, but because he was hiding it from himself. The mind had a way of storing what the heart wasn't ready to feel. For the first time, he understood that his tiredness wasn't a lack of energy. It was a lack of space. His mind had been running at full capacity long before each day began, filled not with tasks, but with unspoken worries and unfinished emotions. It wasn't the world that exhausted him. It was the weight of everything inside him that he never allowed himself to set down. The next day, he passed by the bench where Mr. Hale usually sat. The old man was there again, sipping tea with a serene expression, as if he had been waiting. Evan sat beside him without hesitation. He didn't know how to explain what he had discovered, but he didn't need to. The old man listened quietly as Evan described how his thoughts felt heavier now that he could finally see them. Mr. Hale responded with the kind of calm that made his words feel like they had been shaped by years of experience. He spoke about how people often misunderstand exhaustion. They believe it comes from doing too much, when in truth, much of the heaviness comes from feeling too much, thinking too much, carrying too much alone. He explained that the mind becomes tired when it is forced to hold things it has no room for. Fears unspoken, worries unacknowledged, expectations unquestioned. Evan realized that he had always been afraid of appearing weak, so he learned to carry everything silently. He believed strength was measured by endurance, by how much he could tolerate without breaking. It had never occurred to him that strength might also mean letting things go or letting things be seen. As the sun dipped behind the buildings and shadows stretched across the pavement, Evan understood something simple yet profound. His tiredness was not a flaw. It was a language. The mind speaks through its exhaustion, through the heaviness behind the eyes, through the quiet moments where thoughts feel too loud. And for the first time, Evan allowed himself to listen. He walked home that evening with a strange sense of clarity. The weight had not disappeared, but it felt lighter now that he knew where it came from. He no longer felt as if he was failing at life. He felt as though he was finally beginning to understand it. That night, when he lay down to sleep, the tiredness was still there, but it no longer frightened him. He realized that the mind grows weary not because it is weak, but because it has been strong for too long without rest. And rest, real rest, begins with understanding. In the days that followed, Evan carried a new awareness with him, not loud or dramatic, but steady, as if the conversation with Mr. Hale had placed a small lantern inside his mind. It didn't brighten everything at once, but it allowed him to see corners he had ignored for too long. Each morning, he still woke with the familiar heaviness, yet now he understood it as the mind's way of calling for attention, not a sign of personal insufficiency. This understanding changed the way his actions felt, even the simple ones. When he walked to work, he noticed how his thoughts clung to tasks he hadn't finished, words he wished he had said differently, and worries about how others might perceive him. Before, he would let these thoughts swirl until they blurred into one thick cloud of exhaustion. Now he tried to slow them down, giving each one a moment rather than letting them collide all at once. He realized that the weight was not made of large problems, but countless small ones piling up without order. At the office, he began allowing himself to work at a gentler pace, not out of laziness, but out of recognition that forcing the mind seldom made it lighter. He focused on one task at a time, resisting the urge to jump between windows on his screen or check messages compulsively when he grew uncomfortable. It was difficult. Every part of him was used to multitasking as a way to distract himself from his own thoughts. But as he gave himself permission to slow down, even slightly, he felt small cracks appear in the walls of pressure he had built. He also noticed how often he said yes when he wanted to say no. When a coworker asked for help with something unnecessary, he paused long enough to consider whether he had the energy. When a friend suggested evening plans on a day already crowded with thoughts, he allowed himself to answer honestly, explaining that he was tired and needed a quiet night. These decisions were small, but they created pockets of space in his mind, spaces where rest could finally enter. One evening, as he walked home, the city felt different to him. It wasn't quieter, but he felt more present within it. The sounds no longer blended into an overwhelming background. He could hear them separately: the rumble of buses, the chatter from outdoor cafes, the low hum of traffic. His thoughts were still active, but they no longer drowned everything else. He realized that presence doesn't require solving every worry. It only requires creating enough space between them to breathe. He made tea and sat near his window again. But this time, instead of letting his mind drift uncontrollably, he tried something new. He identified one thought, just one, that had been following him all day. He didn't judge it or push it away, he simply acknowledged it. The thought grew quieter almost immediately, as if it had only wanted to be recognized. He wondered how many unacknowledged thoughts had been fighting for space inside his mind all these months. Over the next few days, Evan created a quiet routine. He spent 5 minutes each evening sorting his mind the way some people sort drawers. He wrote down the 3 thoughts he had carried most heavily that day, not to solve them, but to give them form. He discovered that thoughts lose much of their weight when they are named. A concern about disappointing someone no longer felt enormous when written on paper. A fear about the future no longer felt unmanageable when it was broken into words. The page became a container, holding what the mind no longer needed to carry alone. On a Saturday morning, he decided to visit a nearby park, something he had avoided for months because he always felt too tired for anything that required emotional presence. The park was filled with families, runners, and people reading on benches. Evan found a quiet corner overlooking a pond and sat down. He didn't listen to music or scroll through his phone. He simply watched the water ripple and felt the sun on his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, his mind felt still enough to take in something gentle. As he sat there, he realized that rest wasn't something that arrived after clearing every task or solving every worry. Rest arrived when he allowed himself to stop carrying everything at the same time. He breathed slowly, letting the air settle inside him, and felt a sense of lightness move through him, not complete, but noticeable. On his way home, he passed the bench outside his building where he had spoken with Mr. Hale. The old man was there, as always, his presence calm and grounded. Evan sat beside him, and they shared a quiet moment before Evan explained how he had been trying to close small doors in his mind, one at a time. Mr. Hale listened with the same patient interest as before. He seemed pleased, though he expressed it not with grand gestures, but with a gentle nod and a look that said he knew Evan had taken an important step. The old man shared another piece of wisdom, speaking in a reflective tone. He suggested that the mind is not weakened by carrying emotions or worries. It is weakened by carrying them silently. He reminded Evan that silence inside one's mind can be both healing and suffocating, depending on what is kept there. He encouraged Evan to continue creating space, to continue observing his thoughts without allowing them to build into storms. Evan walked to his apartment after their talk, and for the first time, he sensed the possibility that his mind could become a softer place, not because the world changed, but because he was learning to meet himself with gentleness. That night, as he prepared for bed, he noticed something surprising. The heaviness behind his eyes felt thinner, almost fragile. It hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt like a shadow standing in the way of his life. He realized that change often begins quietly, not with dramatic moments or revelations, but with simple awareness of what has been carried, what can be put down, and what can be allowed to rest. He closed his eyes and felt the subtle difference inside him. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It was something steadier, a sense that the tiredness no longer controlled him. The mind, slowly and quietly, had begun to breathe. As the weeks passed, Evan noticed that his inner world no longer felt like a room packed to the ceiling with unorganized thoughts. Instead, it began to resemble a place with open windows, where light could enter and where he could breathe without feeling surrounded by invisible pressure. The tiredness didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It no longer sat heavily on his chest. It lived in softer corners, appearing only when he returned to old habits of holding too much inside. He became more patient with himself. When his mind drifted toward worry, he paused long enough to notice the shift rather than letting it pull him into hours of restless thinking. When his thoughts grew loud at night, he accepted them instead of fighting them. He discovered that calmness didn't come from the absence of thoughts, but from meeting them gently. Some evenings, he still sat at his window with a warm cup of tea. The city lights shimmered below, and the world looked wide and quiet. In the past, these moments were when exhaustion pressed hardest against him. Now, they became moments of recognition. He could feel the space he had created inside himself. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. He often thought back to the bench outside the building, where everything had begun. He returned there one late afternoon and found Mr. Hale sitting with his familiar calm presence. They sat together without hurrying to fill the silence. Evan shared how the heaviness came and went now, no longer constant, no longer confusing. He said he had learned to close small doors in his mind instead of leaving everything open, and he had realized that the mind becomes tired not from feeling too much, but from carrying everything at once. The old man nodded with quiet approval, as if he had expected this all along. He spoke about how rest is not something the world gives you. It is something you allow yourself when you stop demanding that your mind perform beyond its limits. He reminded Evan that the mind remembers every moment it is ignored and slowly quiets when it is finally heard. Evan walked back to his apartment after that conversation with a steady feeling in his chest. It wasn't excitement or joy, but a kind of ease that had been missing from his life for far too long. He understood now that healing was not a straight line. Some days would feel lighter. Others might feel heavy again. But the tiredness no longer scared him because he knew what it meant. He knew where it came from. One night, as he lay in bed, he noticed something surprising. The silence in the room felt comforting rather than overwhelming. His thoughts still moved, but slowly, without urgency. He felt no need to force answers from them. He let them pass like clouds, knowing they didn't need to be held all at once. He drifted toward sleep not because he was drained, but because he was ready. His mind felt like a place he could return to, not a place he needed to escape from. The weight he once carried alone had softened into something manageable, something human, something he could understand. And in that quiet moment, with the world settling into darkness outside his window, he understood the truth he had been missing for so long. The mind does not grow tired because life is too heavy. It grows tired when it has been carrying what was never meant to be held alone. Rest begins in the smallest choices, in allowing one thought to wait until tomorrow, in giving one feeling space to breathe, in closing one door inside the mind instead of leaving all of them open. It begins when you learn to meet yourself with the gentleness you offer others. As sleep slowly embraced him, Evan felt a soft, steady peace spread across his mind. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was the quiet relief of finally understanding himself. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't fall asleep from exhaustion. He simply fell asleep.
If this story made you feel calm or helped you understand yourself a little more, please like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more peaceful English listening practice.